Welcome to Tippcast by the Nina Guardian. Hello and welcome to Tippcast, the 8th episode here with myself, Shane Stapleton, Shane Brophy of the Nina Guardian as ever, and Brian Flannery, of course, former under-21 All-Ireland winner with Tipperary, went on and also played for Watford. How are you doing, gents?
Good to see you. Well, Shane.
Thanks, good stuff. There's a lot to talk about this weekend, lads. There absolutely is. For anyone who's watching us on Twitter, YouTube or Facebook, get your questions in. We'll try and put them up on screen and talk about them. And so I'll start off. We'll just go straight into it. It's a big weekend coming up. Some massive matches. I don't know, Shane, are you more excited at talking about the county championship draws that have been made this week, or get stuck into the All-Ireland championships with the Leinster and Munster getting going?
I suppose it'll be. I suppose I think everybody is sort of excited for championship now at this stage. Like, I know it's I don't know whether it's in some ways for the teams, whether the 2-week break from league to championship is helpful or not. I suppose you like maybe previously where you had that bit of a build up. It's not there anymore. Like, but look, it is what it is, and I suppose we'll have championship. We'll only have 200 people at the venues next weekend, which is disappointing too. But look, I was at the county finals in Thurles last year when there was only 200 in there, and it was strange. Like there was actually a cracking atmosphere even for the 200. So as long as the 100 each of the most fervent Watford and Clare fans get in there on Sunday, and the same in the Leinster matches all over the country, I think it'll help create a championship atmosphere. It'll be difficult, but it will help.
Yeah, absolutely. When you reflect on that county title for Kildangan last year, Brian, what do you think about? What's the first thing that comes to mind? I remember I came out, I was playing a match myself, but I just got a text from the Owl lad saying, obviously from Bursley, saying goal. And I knew something massive had just happened. That's all you're going to get out of a 69-year-old man is a text saying goal. So I just went searching on Twitter and I saw that winning goal laid on in glory for Kildangan.
Yeah, look, I think Shane is right. There might have been only 100 Kildangan supporters in Simple Stadium, but it was almost like there was 10,000. Probably one of my favourite match probably last year is the county final, and I was in, I suppose, the Mount Sion Centre watching it with a few of the lads, and by the end of it, everybody in the Mount Sion club we were on our feet, roaring and shouting at the telly. Like, it was, you couldn't have a more dramatic finish, and look, for the home club, like, it's a brilliant achievement coming from where they have been, over the last 25 years to win a senior championship is extraordinary. But I think important as well, and I was only talking to Dara Egan there recently, and I was just saying to him, had they not have won it, that would have been then their third defeat in 5 years. So, sometimes when you get the opportunity, you've got to grasp it. A lot of people might have felt maybe they should have won it the year before, but it is important to get over the line, and I think they've paid their dues. They've built over the years from, first of all, maybe winning a minor B title to a minor A. I watched them beat Holy Cross there a couple of years ago in an under-21 final as well. So they've had that steady step-by-step progress, but you still want to get over the line. And while everybody would have been saying, look, they're a young team, they'll win one eventually, until you actually get your hands on it, you can't take that for granted. But huge achievement, brilliant excitement. And like I said, there was only 100 maybe Kildangan supporters in it, but they certainly made their voices heard. And, I suppose that excitement in this year, Kildangan, to going into the championship as title holders, I'm sure it's been a lifetime, or a number of lifetimes, to win a senior title in Kildangan. They won't want giving it up too easily either.
And of course, it probably seemed like it was just destined to be Lockmore straight away again. Shane, were you surprised to see that come out? Are you excited to actually see the two of them face off whenever it comes down the line?
Oh, definitely. And I know that the county board have said, like, the lineup of the fixtures of the group has to be determined. And I'm sure there's an element of the county CCC looking, how do we doctor the draw to make sure that's the first match of the championship, some part and all. Like, I think it's even if something was done to manipulate to have Kildangan and Lockmore the first up, I just think it's after the game they produced last year. Whenever the championship starts, hopefully it's late August, maybe after Tip have had a good run the championship. Like, that's the perfect lift-off game, maybe a Friday or an early Saturday, just to get the whole thing going. Like, and look, as much as as much as Kildangan were the story last year, so were Lockmore. Like, they added so much between the hurling and the football, and to come up short 1 point in each of both of the finals was heartbreaking for them. And I said to myself, when the history of Tipperary GA for 2020 will be written, like, it'll say Clonmel and Kildangan were the county champions. But I think a lot of people remember Lockmore for their endeavours, even though they fell short by a point in each game. So, like, it's I just think it's one of a number. I think all groups are interesting, but that one particularly, and Kildangan and Lockmore meeting. Hopefully, if it was my way, I'd have them playing first up in the first round, just as a fantastic kick-off to the championship whenever it does start.
What do you think of that, Brian? I mean, I'm certainly interested in Group 4 here. Borrisoleigh, Nina, Killarwan, McDonough's, Roscrea. Very hard to predict what way that group will go, but is there any fixtures in particular that you're seeing there that you'd be interested in? I suppose even in Group 3 there, Kildangan and Lockmore would certainly be fancy to come through.
Yeah, look, I think the championship in recent years, I think since they've gone to the top 16 and the 4 groups of 4, every game has something in it, and there's no easy games for any club. But I think whether it is by accident or design, Tipperary have hit on a good formula for a championship structure. And look, I know maybe some of the traditionalists would still like maybe the higher prominence on the divisional, but I think just time has moved on, and with the amount of games that needs to be played, I think the top 16 is a format that works. And like, really, any of the teams in the top 16, you could see them coming out and qualifying for a quarter final. So it's just, I suppose, look, they'll have a little bit of a break now until championship gets underway. League games have already started. They will be playing without their county players for the next number of weeks. But once it gets back in September, you're into serious games straight away. So look, it's something really to look forward to. And I suppose, look, the inter-county is going to take the limelight in the next few weeks, but there'll be a lot of high-profile games, and I imagine a lot of good attendances, and hopefully, I suppose, from Tip County Board point of view as well, is that we'll be able to get decent attendances back in. Revenue is a huge issue for every county board, and most county boards, the majority of revenue comes from the local club championships, and there's great games there. I'm sure there'll be big crowds. Please God, once they're allowed back into games.
Yeah, and people out there, if you want to get your comments in across any of the platforms, please do send them in. Certainly, I think it's quite ludicrous the talk of 200 people going into these matches. You walk down the street, certainly in Dublin here where I'm living, and there's more than 200 people on the canal any sunny day. There's thousands of people out there. So the idea that you couldn't do it safely outdoor kind of beggars belief as far as I'm concerned. Shane, just to go back into some of these fixtures, Borrisoleigh, obviously county champions in 2019. Killarwan, I mean, this is something that Brian mentioned earlier about Kildangan, that there's no point in saying that you have a team that can do it. I mean, at some point you actually have to go and do it. Nina are waiting since 1995. Killarwan, they're another team that have kind of, sounds a bit harsh, but almost been serial bridesmaids. And Roscrea, they kind of fell away a little bit. Maybe suggestions coming back. I think we all want to see how Alan Tynan progresses for Nina or for Roscrea. What are your thoughts on that group and the teams in there?
As Brian mentioned, like the traditionalists, the North Division will be happy to have all those 4 teams together. Like Borrisoleigh, they're going to be, like, if Johnny Kelly's still there, like, they're not going to. I don't think they're going to do anything different. Like, in some ways, they're probably going to be a little stronger. You have Eddie Ryan eligible this year, and like he's only going to add to their forward line. He's the son of.
Made a good start last week against Killarwan. Got a lovely catch over the bar straight away.
He did, yeah. No, he's a fine prospect, and like, you think they've already unearthed Kevin Maher and James Devaney over the last couple of years. So, like, you suppose maybe in 2017 it was the one area maybe where Borrisoleigh were short was in the forwards. They've definitely rectified it over the last couple of years. Like, I think Roscrea are definitely a team to be interested in there. Like, the great John Carroll is back, is over that team there this year. John Sheedy, who's in with the Tip Seniors, he's I suppose he's the kit man, but like he's coached teams in Portrude down through years. He's there. Like, that'll be they have a team from 2017 that got to won the minor A championship. Very, very good team. Definitely an upward curve there. Killarwan are the one that I'd be worried about. I just wonder, have they hit their peak? Have they missed the boat? underage, or the same level of talent that they maybe brought through between 05 and 012 is probably not there coming through. Like Seamus Hennessy is getting on. He'll still give you what he can, but I just think that the body is not as willing. Like the head is always willing with Seamus, but the body's beginning to break down. You just don't know what Niall O'Mara, like he's just so unfortunate with injuries. And like you think with Bonner gone, he's going to be a central part of that half forward line for Tip this year. Then he goes and suffers appendicitis and he's out of the match on Sunday week. And you're probably thinking he'll be, if Tipper in the Munster final or an All-Ireland quarter final, that he's probably going to be under pressure to get back for that. So like they'll still be competitive. I just think Killarwan could be the vulnerable one there in that group.
I keep the fingers crossed on that one. Just even looking at Group 1 and 2 as well, I'll throw this to you, Brian. And Thurles, Drum, Upperchurch, bit of a mid-vibe there, and Aero and a Carty from the west thrown in. Then Group 2, Clonoulty, Rossmore, Toomevara, Holy Cross, Ballycahill, and Mullinahone also. I mean, it's only a couple of years ago since Clonoulty Rossmore won that game, and Timmy Hammersley's still the main man up front there. He was actually coaching St. Kevin's, a team in Dublin in Senior B, against my own Coola Senior B team there the other day. So plenty of sort of hurling intellect going on there with that team. Any team in particular there that you think might be able to make a burst from Group 1 and 2?
Yeah, look, I suppose a lot of the focus will be on Thurles Sarsfields. Again, certainly on paper, they have a very strong lineup, perhaps underperformed in recent years. But I suppose when you look at it as well, it's difficult to be, when you're competing at the business end every year, year in, year out. I think sometimes you kind of have a down year. And with so many players involved in different, I suppose, inter-county teams, sometimes players come back, maybe not quite carrying injuries, but certainly tired, maybe, you know what I mean? So a lot will depend on, I suppose, how their inter-county stars come back from the inter-county campaign. And again, sometimes if Tip have a good championship, the likes of the Mars, they could be a big driving force with it. I suppose the one thing is, it is a lot of the same players that, it's more or less the same team over the last few years with Sarsfield. So, whether they have one or two players coming through that can, I suppose, add to it and maybe add that little bit of pace as well, time will tell. I mean, Clonoulty have, I suppose, consistently maybe punched above their weight. They're always there or thereabouts, very difficult to beat. And they are, I suppose, the leading light out in West Tipperary. And you could certainly see them, being difficult to beat. And you'd have to fancy them to come through and get to the knockout stages as well.
And Shane, what do you think? Toomevara showed green shoots last year. Drummond Inch also beat Bursley, of course, dramatically at Semple Stadium. Out of the teams that we're looking at there in Group 1 or 2, are there any teams that you're thinking could go on a good run?
Yeah, it's I suppose look at a Group 1. I'd say Upperchurch Strumban must be hitting their head off a brick wall to see Thurles and Drum in the same group again. Like they forever seem to be in their way in the mid championship or a county championship. But like I don't think Upperchurch at the moment would fear either of them. Like so, I think that group is pretty much wide open. Like I think Thurles are in a bit of period transition. Like there's a fabulous crop of under 16s and minors and coming. Like it's going to take a few years. I just think up in the forwards is where they're struggling at the moment. If they get Billy McCarthy should be back August, September time when the county championship starts. He might feature for Tip during the summer, but I think it might be pushing it. But when he went out of that team for that county quarter final against Nina Rogue, we saw how they struggled. Like he just he's the leader of that forward line. So like if they get him back, I'm sure it would make them a completely different unit. You go to the other Group 2, I think Clonoulty are very strong. I think Holy Cross, after bedding in the first year last year in the top grade, will be very. They'll look to kick on. Mullinahone coming up from the Seamus Arena. I think we're going to get a big year out of Mullinahone, just particularly for the likes of Owen Kelly, Paul Curran, especially. Like, will they see this maybe as their last hurrah at Senior A level? And look, I saw it myself in that county final against Laura. They were outstanding that day. Take the two senior guys that needed to step up, and that day they did it. Like they were nearly unplayable. And they'll be hard to beat. Toom, I think that Toom will be. They got to a county quarter final last year. They'll probably feel against Killadang, and they didn't show a true level of themselves. I actually think of the groups, that Group 2 I think is the most wide open. I think you could pick any 2 from 4 depending on the day. to come out of it. And just something to in terms of what Brian mentioned there, in terms of compared to last year. Remember last year's championship, guys were fresh and coming in. Like it was the first competition. A lot will be, I think, interesting this year. After the inter-county championship, who is firing well? Like, will the Tip guys be coming back on a high, or will some of them be coming back maybe a little despondent? So, or maybe some guys will be coming back struggling after a bit of poor form. So I think there'll be an awful lot of intangibles when this championship begins in August of who's playing well and off the inter-county season.
Brian, there's been an awful lot of injuries for inter-county teams. I'm sure down there in Mount Zion, you're seeing it. Austin Gleeson has obviously picked up a knock. Hopefully he'll be right. Connor Prunty. There's a couple of other guys. Shane Fives, of course. And we're seeing it across the spectrum of inter-county teams in both codes. I'm just wondering, before we jump on to that, about club players, the fact that they're not straight back into their county championships. A lot of them are playing league, or, you know, there's no massive rush for them. So do you think this year, above all years, that clubs can sort of, you know, slowly freewheel into their championships and be in decent shape, whereas for county teams it's breakneck speed?
Yeah, look, and I think Shane touched on it there. Like, you know, last year it was the club first and the county second, and it's the opposite this year. We're going inter-county first and club second. And you know, I personally had to say I really loved the club scenario last year, because you did have your inter-county players. You could go up to the my local field there and watch Austin Gleeson training every evening, and there was just a great buzz around the club and the club scene that was probably missing for a long time. It has been, I suppose, in for a number of years now, when players come back after the inter-county, there's almost a readjustment required where, like Shane mentioned, some of them are kind of despondent and mightn't have gone too well for them. Or if you come back, as I said, maybe haven't had a good inter-county campaign, you're ready to kick on with your club and lead. But this will be, I suppose, having watched, you know, definitely the clubs got the advantage of it last year with fresher players, probably fitter, you know, and it's something. I think that the injuries is probably more got to do with the league being sandwiched, you know, in a very short period of time, 5 games in 6 weeks. And despite all counties, I suppose, having big panels, you know, I wonder when they sit back maybe at the end of the championship and look back on it, did they maybe overload players too quickly in relation to the you hear about these training blocks while you're trying to play games as well? That's very difficult to do. And I know Liam Sheedy spoke about it after the last game in Welsh Park, you know, that they looked a bit lethargic and that they were, after being through a tough training block, that had an impact on it. But, you know, you look at this weekend, there's at least half a dozen Watford players with carrying injuries. I see Shane O'Donnell there mentioned as well as unlikely to start. So it has taken its toll, and it's, I don't know, we have so much sports science these days, but you wonder maybe are they pushing players too much? And like, if you have that, you know, games and heavy training, I don't think you can do both at the same time. And I think some players have just broken down, and you have a lot of these soft tissue injuries, quad injuries, muscle type injuries, and it's likely to be a feature of this year's championship. You know, which team can get their players on the field, and which are struggling to, and that'll probably have a big impact before the inter-county championship is out. I think the clubs will probably have a better, in general, the ordinary club player, there's less stress, there's less panic. They all know they're probably not playing till September. They can taper it a little bit more. They're probably, you know, as I said, they can target it and spread it out a little bit better. I think the inter-county thing, you know, there was a reluctance, you know, that whole thing at the start of the year, and what was an elite player, what was an elite team, and they were a little bit later going back. And, you know, sometimes you wonder about Croke Park, were they just happy because you had inter-county teams not training and there was less expenses on counties and all that side of it, as opposed to for the player welfare. They may have been better off, I suppose, you know, with a longer run-in, first of all, to the league, and maybe the league spread out over 1 or 2 weeks. But it's very difficult to get the balance. You know, we all want a proper window for club action as well. And, you know, it's hard to get everything into place. You know, the day the dual player is obviously gone in men's anyway, and probably even in women's sport is probably going to be a thing of the past as well. So, you know, it's just hard, and the number of games and different championships that has to be played. But I think it was inevitable that we were going to move to a split season where you have club and inter-county, and I'd say that would be here to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of pitches are like car parks at the moment. So, the turf is so hard, and players, after not playing for 6 or 7 months, all this twisting and turning and getting hit while you're doing it, it's very tough to avoid all those injuries. But definitely want to come back to what you make of the Watford Tipperary game a couple of weeks ago. But just before we do, we'll just touch back on the club once more and look at the Seamus O'Ryan draw. Now, we're certainly going to start with your own club there, Shane. Laura drawn in with Portroe, St. Mary's and Cashel King Cormac's there. Tasty enough stuff.
Yeah, we're getting the tour of the county, one from the north, one from the mid, and one from the west, one from the south. Yeah, look, it's I say of the 4 groups, and this is not me playing it down because I'm a Laura man, like it definitely is the toughest of the 4 groups there. Like Portroe, always difficult to beat. They played a cracking game in Cloughjordan last year, and the championship was 5-18 to 4-16. But I remember Portroe were the better team in the first half, and only 2 brilliant Bonner Maher goals kept us in it. And the second half we took over. And of course Bonner's not going to be there probably for most, if not all, the championship, and he's a big loss. And I suppose that's the thing. I mean, coming back to injuries, Laura were blessed last year. I don't think we had any key player missing for any of the games really. They were all there, and you just don't want to be losing anyone. You look, St. Mary's won 2 county minor A's back to back in 15 and 16. You'd like to think they're going to improve, and I think Cashel were the team every top seed wanted to avoid, because look, if they get the 4 guys from Knockavilla that on all known form will walk straight into their starting 15, so that crosses them from maybe middle of the road contenders to top seed. So look, we don't know if that's going to be rectified between now and August. So if you had Aaron Brown, Ger Brown, Devin Ryan and Nathan Ryan in, that's a serious addition. Plus you have a Ryan O'Dwyer coming back who will, for that Cashel team were young as it is. So look, you're bringing in an old head, an inter-county experience. He's going to galvanise that group. So if you're looking, I think that's the difficult one. I think you look at the other groups, you have Newport, Templederry, Silver Mines in Group 2. That'll be a toughie too, but I think Newport, Templederry would probably fancy themselves there. You have Group 3 with Killinall, Ballina, Tracy's and Gortnahoe. You try to think Killinall and Ballina would be favoured there, but Gortnahoe coming up as intermediate champions, as far as I know, they have no inter-county panellists, so they'll get a clean run. And you always see with a team that's promoted, they're motivated, they're ready to go. So I keep an eye on Gortnahoe there. And then you look in Group 1, you have Burgess coming down from Dan Breen, you have Carrick Swan, enigmatic to say the least. I think so. You just don't know what you're going to get from Swans. There's some fabulous hurlers there, but just from day to day, you just don't know what you're going to get from them. And then you have Sarsfields and Killadang second team. So and they were very competitive last year. So that's a group where you probably think it's Burgess and Carrick Swans will be favourites. But look, as we saw with Laura last year, if Thurles Sarsfields early in the championship, when they haven't pulled too many up to their senior A team, are very, very tough to beat. So it's all the grades in senior hurling, senior B and intermediate. As Brian said earlier, I think we've hit on a format which has all teams at a very, very competitive level in all the grades. Definitely recently the issues were when they come to the divisions. I know we're very protective of the divisions in the 4K, in the forum, but that's where the hammerings tended to happen, where you had maybe, I remember a few years ago, Lochmore took on Clonmackenny, and I think it was 421 to 4 points or something like that. That's no good to Lochmore. It's no good to Clonmackenny, and
well, the flip side is people that say that the big teams are pulling the ladder up after them, and the smaller teams are going to be left behind. I don't know, Brian, would you have a thought on that? Because it's not like 15 years ago, Killadangan were probably well off the pace, and now they're county championships. And I mean, I can see definitely what Shane is saying, and in a lot of the ways you have to keep progressing things, but there's that other side too, Brian.
Yeah, but look, I mean, in fairness, if you're good enough, you'll get promoted up into it. You know what I mean? It's not as if there's no options for the second 16 or that. I think it, and whether what you call it, whether you change the name Senior B or intermediate premier, I think every club wants an opportunity. Sometimes I suppose, look, I've been from North Tipperary as well. I grew up with great North Tip finals and huge crowds attending them. But like, you know, is it realistic to have 13 senior clubs in North Tipperary? Probably not. With very few of them with a chance of winning a trophy. So I think you have to have change, and like there's so few. I suppose if you look at, you know, the West Division, the South Division, you know, you couldn't realistically have a veto of just because you won a South Championship into a county quarter final or into the back end of the championship. So I think it's, you know, it's there. If you're good enough, you'll earn your way up. If you're struggling, you'll get relegated, and I think that's the way it should be. But you'll have better games at a standard that clubs are at. It's more realistic. I mean, you don't want throwing in, as I said, some of the lower end, you know, club number 30, 32 against a team that's in the top 4 or 5, because that's where, you know, it's happened over the years. You know, Harry Swans often came out, they could win a South Championship, but then they'd run into a Tummyvar or that, and there could be 30 pints or whatever in the difference. And I think it's just a better structure. But it's not. It's there for clubs to progress as well. And you mentioned one of the teams there, St. Mary's in Clonmel, is a club, I suppose, look, we'd be familiar enough down here in Mount Sion in that we played them very regularly underage, and they seem to have a huge amount of work done in, say, maybe the last 10 or more years underage. And I know Shane mentioned about they win a couple of minors. They've also had Michael Ryan, former Watford manager, in there in recent years as well. They're a club, you know, that could progress. You know, they seem to be doing certainly everything right at underage level. But they'll, you know, it's like everything you mentioned about Killer One coming with a young team. There comes a time when you've got to grasp it and as I said, win the games you need to win to get into the business end of championship and get up to that top 16 where, you know, where the real competition is, you know. And every senior club, let's be honest, every club have ambitions to play, you know, to play at senior level, and that Dan Breen dream is there. You know, 25 years ago, there would nobody been talking about Killadangan as maybe ever winning a senior championship. And like they've proven that you don't have to be a big town or a huge parish or with major numbers, that if you have right structures, you can make incremental improvements over time. So I know, look, I think it's fair enough, and I think you have to have provide competition at a level that clubs are at, rather than, you know, what they want to be.
Yeah, Shane, I know this might be an unfair question on you because you were away sunning yourself down in Cork for the last week or so on holidays. But you talked about Cashel, and you talked about the likes of Ger Brown and the other players that may or may not be transferring over, and the bit of an impasse there, which is probably keeping Ger Brown away from the Tipperary panel at the moment. What's the latest that you sort of heard on that? And, you know, I mean, I've kind of said this about Ger Brown before, former under-21 hurler of the year, that he could end up being a hurler of the year at inter-county level in the next 5 years or so, but maybe he might not be on the panel, depending on which trajectory he goes on.
Yeah, but I think from an immediate point of view, I suppose that the bigger impact is actually on the Tip under-20s, where Aaron Brown and Devin Ryan can't be part of the panel because they're not registered with a club. They're not a member of their existing club of Knockavilla Kickens, plus their transfer to Cashel, while approved by under appeal recently enough. There's a counter appeal gone in now again, so like that transfer has had to go on hold. So I don't know. It all depends on how long that's going to be dragged out. Look, it's there's no doubt it's negatively affecting the likes of Ger Brown. You mentioned Aaron Brown, Devin Ryan. This put the three guys that maybe have inter-county credentials at the moment. So look, you hate to see the situation, like, because like every club likes to see their best going on to play with Tipperary. But look, I don't know the exact reasoning for the I suppose the dispute and the impasse down there. Like, but it seems to be that there's no resolution for it in terms of them going back to play with Kickens. It's either the transfers are granted to Cashel, or you lose them permanently to GA. So look, it's not an easy decision. Like you want to see the guys playing in their prime years, but then you also want the parish rule being protected as much as possible. You just don't want the best players moving on to play with the bigger clubs if maybe their own club is struggling or something like that. So look, it's a catch-22 situation, I think, for the decision makers of how they're going to come down and make it a decision on this one.
And just a final thought then, has anything in the club football championship in Tipperary caught your eye in terms of the draw?
I suppose the only thing, like you could probably at this stage you'd nearly name 5 of the clubs that will make the quarterfinals. You have Commercials, Lockmore, Mile Rovers, they're the big 3, and you'll have Kilsheelan in there too. And you mentioned JK Brackens. I suppose the interesting thing of the senior draws in hurling and football is that Brackens and Lockmore have ended up in the same group in both the senior hurling and football. So like they're 2 local derbies as it is. So like you have each other maybe potentially making consecutive weekends and different codes. I think they'll be interesting enough. So like it's hard to look past those 5 maybe. Like you never know from year to year. Killinall could do something. Arravale Rovers, I suppose they'll probably feel they're stuck in the group of Commercials again. But I think the likelihood is that the quarter-final rounds will be coming back now that there's extra weekends to play with. So like in terms of that draw, like it's you're probably looking at maybe the same 5 or 6 teams getting to the knockout stages again. But I suppose it's great to have something for all clubs, hurling and football, to go at this stage.
I had my mic muted there just for a second, lads. Sorry about that. Brian, you obviously have a great insight into both the Tipperary camps and the Waterford camps. I'm sure you're watching them both very closely all the time. Now, you saw Tipperary fall away badly in that second half, or else Watford just completely took over. Liam Cahill obviously managing the team there. What were your thoughts on that game and why either Tipperary fell away so badly or Watford took over?
Yeah, look, it was it was a big surprise because Tipperary had such a strong team out. And I think in some ways maybe it was fortunate that there was only 200 people at it and there was no TV cameras, or it wasn't on TV camera, because it was a real poor performance from Tipperary. And I'm sure Liam Sheedy and the lads must have went home scratching their heads, really wondering what happened, because particularly in the second half, I think Watford came out and scored 8 out of the first 9 points in that second half. And you also got to remember, by that stage, Austin Gleeson was gone off injured, Shane Fives was gone off injured, Conor Prunty had retired injured, Jack Fagan had retired injured at the start of the second half. So it was a real mix and match sort of Waterford lineup in comparison to what looked like a championship side for Tipperary. Look, anybody that was at the game, I think the big question mark around Tipperary was the issue in relation to pace. Struggled very much when Waterford players ran at them, and consistently Waterford ran down the middle of the Tipperary defence. And also, I suppose, inside close to goal, Desi Hutchinson was causing huge problems. But it's that pace. Callum Lyons, Darragh Lyons, Waterford then had Jack Prendergast, the 2 yellow helmets, Jack Prendergast and Peter Hogan. And every time they got the ball, they just ran at their opposite number. And Tipperary really looked vulnerable when Waterford ran at them. And I suppose, look, that is the big question. It was a game that was on 1:30, I think maybe 1:45, very warm afternoon. Is there mitigating factors? Liam Sheedy did allude to the fact that they had done a heavy week's training, but Tip looked very flat-footed, very short of pace, and you'd have to say so close to the championship that it would be worry. Or maybe we're looking too much into just a one-off game in the National League. It may just have been flat and it didn't happen on the day. But I suppose if we were having this conversation a couple of years ago, when Liam came back at the start of 2019, the conversation would have been around, our Tipperary going into a transition period. How many of these All-Ireland winning under 20 and under 21 team will be coming through? I think the conversation is still there maybe 2 years later. Brilliant achievement to win that 2019 All-Ireland, but they say Father Time is undefeated. You've huge players in that Tipperary team, in that Tip panel that have, I suppose, they're generational players, really, some of them, in what they've achieved and their performances for Tipperary over the years. But you do certainly in leaving West Park, you'd be wondering, is the end near for this particular Tipperary team? Is there enough pace in the side, and is there enough that can maybe topple a Galway or a Limerick in knockout championship? And even I suppose look, the Tipperary obviously are playing the winners of Clare and Waterford. So there's definitely, I'd say there's definitely worries in with regard to the Tipperary team at the moment. But I don't know. I suppose look, the team management have very much, I suppose, gone with the tried and tested. So I don't see an about change at this stage. And I imagine the majority of that team that started against Waterford in the league a couple of weeks ago will start the first round of the championship as well for Tipperary. So it's a case of, can they turn it around, or was that just an off day?
Shane, has your opinion changed much since we spoke about this game last week?
Not particularly. No, it was. I actually thought it was a Tip couldn't really lose going down there. But I did think it was more beneficial for Tip to go down with a full strength team. But I did think we hadn't seen the Tipperary team stressed throughout the National League. Everybody, like Limerick had a setback, Galway had a setback, Waterford had an early setback. Clare, I just didn't think Tip had a setback in the league so far. Maybe it was no harm to having a ground, because maybe going into the championship being undefeated, it could have been maybe a false sense of how good and how Tipperary were. I think Liam and Eamon and the boys were able to go away and say, okay, now we have an issue. We have an issue, particularly when, and I think it'll be something I think all the teams will be thinking about with Tipperary is, okay, we'll invite Tipperary on us. We'll let them drive the ball in long, and then we'll counter-attack on them. We'll hit them in waves. And I think that'll be the one thing all teams would have taken from that match, is that, okay, we'll allow Tip to go a short puck out, so we'll allow them maybe to get up to the 45, 65, and invariably Tip's first option will be to maybe try and hit the full forward line from there. And like if Tip don't win primary possession first up, teams will turn them over and hit them going the other way. And that'll be something they'll have been working on in training, because look, whoever's going to win between Waterford and Clare on Sunday, they play the very same way. Limerick and Cork want to run the ball up the field. So like if Tip end up into a Munster final, even Wexford, like there's very few of the teams don't ideally like to work the ball through the lines up the field in this stage. So look, Tip have been forewarned. And like I just talked maybe something to touch on Brian. I thought the thing that impressed me with Waterford is, like, when you look at any inter-county team, if you at the start of the year you lost your goalie, you lost the Mahoney brothers, you lost Tyg de Burka, like it's just so impressive the depth Waterford have created. Like Liam Cahill, for me, he's taken away the excuses. There's no feeling sorry for yourself if some guy you're missing. It's next man up. And like to see some of the guys that come off the bench in that second half, I think the chap of the Powers and the chap of the Kerwins, like guys I knew nothing about. Even like I think one for me was going back to the 2016 under-21 campaign with Peter Hogan. I thought, why is he falling away? He's revitalized now. I just think Liam Cahill and they've created such a depth of a squad there. Whereas, okay, you could be without Austin Gleeson, don't care. It's next man up. We'll carry on from there. I think that's the impressive thing for me from Waterford this year.
But and I agree with you. And I think Liam Cahill should take huge credit, because in the league against Westmeath, for example, he literally put out a second string side, and they were able to, I suppose, to get the win. Lost a couple of guys sent off in it, but still won the game. And like Shane was saying there, for the second half against Tipperary, there was Kieran Kerwin, there was Eddie Lynch. You had a lot of guys who were not household names. In the team, marking the likes of Shamie Callanan and Jason Fords, etc., and not looking out of place. Darragh Lyons in the field has been a revelation as well, and he's another guy very similar to Jamie Byrne in, I suppose, in work rate and carrying that ball at the opposition. And as I said, look, when you can involve so many players, and I think about 33, 34, in fact, the whole panel have got an opportunity during the league. I mean, that must be brilliant when you go back into training then Tuesday night. Young Michael Kiley came on, got a point. Kieran Kerwin, as I said, originally from a junior club out in Kill, just out the road from the city, came on and scored a point. Gave a huge amount of players who were in, I suppose, feeling part of it, feeling as if maybe they have an opportunity and that they've something to offer. So I think that's very shrewd management on Liam Cahill's part. But also, as I said, they're able to come on. They're not looking out of place, which is huge. And I think they're in a very good place. They've won their Watford have won their 3 home games in the league. I think beating the All-Ireland champions Limerick. Okay, Limerick lost a player early on, and it then became a game that Watford had to win, but they did, and they won it when they needed to. I suppose Watford are a county that, if you were to ask anybody in the street who's going to win the All-Ireland, they're probably not going to be mentioned. But if you look at the evidence, you look at their performances, look at the form going into it, they're probably, outside of Galway and Limerick, they probably have as good a chance as anybody else.
I had a good debate with Michael Verney the other day, Shane, about what was the pecking order in hurling at the moment. And I don't think any of us here could make any debate that it isn't Limerick number 1. The way Galway have played this year, I think you could make a case for them being number 2, even though Tipperary beat them. But just, if you read between the lines, it looks like they've progressed a little bit. But then, it was put to me that Watford were number 3. And I would say, well, look, when did Watford last beat Tipperary in the Championship? 2008. I'd be pushing hard for 3 for Tipperary at a minimum here, whereas others are saying Watford are number 3. What would you think, Shane?
It disturbs me to agree with a man from Borough across the border, but I sort of agree with Michael there. I have Waterford as a 3 ahead of Tip. I just think it's a sort of, what have you done for me lately? I think Waterford have shown more over the last 12 months than Tipperary. That's just pure. And then it's not just what happened in the league match a couple of weeks ago. It's just the rate of improvement in this Waterford team. Like Iarla Daly just looks to the manner born in that half back line. He's so impressive. To lose your iconic centre back in Tadhg de Burka, and he's not really missed. There's no doubt if Tadhg de Burka's fit, he plays. But imagine if you had a half back line with de Burka and Daly in it, and you could have anybody else then Callum Lyons. God Almighty, you could argue they'd be up there with the Limerick half back lines being the best in the country, and then you could release Austin Gleeson probably to go push back up the field in midfield or even in the half hour line. I think that's the interesting thing for me is that, look, what way the Waterford team is going to line out. I just read some excerpts of the Waterford News at our preview. It looks like Conor Prunty's probably not going to make it. Looks like Jamie Byrne is touch and go. Maybe if Jamie Byrne is not going to make it through injury, you probably could be looking at Austin Gleeson back in the middle of the field for this game. I just think it'll be interesting to see what match it will Liam Cahill go down the matchup route in terms of maybe what Clare are going to bring. What are they going to do with Tony Kelly? I just think this match is so fascinating. I think you have arguably outside of Galway, maybe the 2 form teams in the league at 2 and 3. Because I still think Clare's league was actually pretty good. The people say, I don't think that defeat to Antrim in round 1 looks as bad as it did on paper initially. Antrim have been very competitive, and then Clare were a good bit better than Wexford in that round 2 game up until the red card. So you could have easily had Clare finishing top of Division 1B, and you could have been having the 2 form teams in the league playing this weekend. I just think this is a very, very tough game to call.
Brian, do you expect Austin Gleeson to play? Do you expect him to stay in midfield, or would you like to see him back in full forward where, as the season went on last year, he was absolutely brilliant? And then one other question in on top of that. Do you expect to see Callum Lyons reprise his role as man marker on Tony Kelly?
Yeah, look, I suppose when I was driving home after the All-Ireland last December, it sounds funny now talking about December All-Ireland, but the one big takeaway from that was Waterford were over-dependent on Stephen Bennett and Austin Gleeson in the forward line. So to be even talking that, that they've added strength to the forwards, that you could afford not to play Austin Gleeson in the forward line, that's a huge improvement in a very short space of time. I think a lot would depend on if Jamie Byrne is unavailable. I think you could well see Austin Gleeson maybe in the middle of the field in at that stage, alongside maybe Darragh Lyons, Callum Lyons, Iarla Daly, and maybe Kevin Moran coming back into contention. I suppose some of the big bonuses, Shane Bennett returning to the panel this year, he's been outstanding. And again, he's another player with pace. He has genuine pace in that inside line. And like Desi Hutchinson, his first year in senior intercounty last year, had a very good year, was particularly good against Clare, but he looks as if he's after, moving into another level again. So they're two big additions or players playing at the top of the game. Kieran Bennett, I suppose it's a case with a lot of the Watford players. A lot of them can play in different positions. Kieran Bennett is mostly this year in the half forward line, but he's another guy that could slip back into the half back line if necessary. So they have options, but I would think ideally if Liam Cahill had I suppose Jamie Byrne on board, it would be Austin Gleeson maybe wing back beside Erla Daly and Callum Lyons. A lot of discussion, I suppose, about Tony Kelly, and I suppose, look, you can't go into any game without having some sort of plan for Tony Kelly. 12 months ago, it was Callum Lyons who was man-to-man job on Tony Kelly. Clare were, unfortunate. I think he picked up an injury in the warm-up, aggravated during the game, and eventually Tony Kelly limped out of action. I just wonder, though, this year, Callum Lyons' influence from half-back and his attacking influence on Waterford. If I was Brian Lohan, I'd certainly be thinking about, well, look, if Waterford wanted to put Callum Lyons on him, grand, but he'll be standing in corner back for the day and not involved in the play. So I think it would be dangerous for Waterford to have a very fixed man-to-man marking, I suppose, plan for Tony Kelly. Maybe if Tony plays on the inside line, somebody like Conor Gleeson might be positioned to mark him, and if he's playing further out the field, well, yeah, let Callum Lyons switch on to him, because Callum, I suppose, has the athleticism. But I think at this stage, the way Waterford are played in the league and they've been so positive, I don't think you want to take Callum Lyons' influence away from the game. I remember a number of years ago, I think it was back in the 90s, up in Croke Park on Patrick's Day, watching the Club All-Irelands, and Shawnee McMahon of St. Joseph Tour Bearfield was standing corner back marking Joe Rabbit. And I said to myself, well, that's a win for Athenry. And I think they went on to win that. So I think Waterford just need to be careful on the, as I said, being too dogmatic about, yes, Tony Kelly is a player you've got to factor in and you've got to have a plan for. But I think you need a bit of flexibility in that as well, because you don't want to take away, from where Waterford are. And as I said, Callum Lyons is hugely influential to the way they play, running off the shoulder, being available at the end of things. So I think it's something they need to be careful of. But look, 12 months ago, lads, there was very little in it below in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Stephen O'Keefe made two very good saves in the second half that helped Waterford keep Clare out of arm's reach and just to keep that little bit ahead of them. So you're back to Thurles this Sunday. Munster Championship games, there's usually very little in it anyway, and favoritism wouldn't normally sit well with Waterford. I mean, that's being honest about it, and I think the general thing is, until Waterford actually win a title, there is always going to be a bit like you, Shane, there, that doubt, and can they do it when it matters most? But I think at this stage, you mentioned Austin Gleeson, to Stephen Bennett, Patrick Curran, Conor Gleeson, Shane Bennett. These are the generation that have won minor and under 21 All-Irelands. They're now 25, 26 years of age. Their window for, I suppose, winning an All-Ireland is now, and that window doesn't stay open for very long. And I think in Liam Cahill and his management, I think they probably have the right, I suppose, backroom team that, that can drive them on to, and we'll get the very best out of them. And as I said, we've seen even in this league, players that would be regarded, certainly down here, as, good club hurlers have come in and contributed. And that must be a great compliment, I suppose, to Liam Cahill and Michael Bevins and all the backroom team. There is, I suppose, as positive a position going into a Munster Championship as they've ever been, really, to be honest.
Shane, I think there's frailties in both, or potentially frailties in both backlines. If Conor Prunty isn't available, who picks up Aaron Shanahan, given his size, and even like he did a nice bit of damage in the air against Conor Prunty last year, scored was it 1 or 2 goals and set up another one for Aidan McCarthy. Aidan McCarthy he's on absolute fire, a player who's going to have to be watched. But then at the other end, given the way that Watford are able to carry the ball and straight up the guts as they did against Tipperary, John Conlon at centre back is going to have a much tougher time than he had against a fairly meek Kilkenny there a week and a half ago.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I don't know who, if Conor Prunty doesn't make it, who Brian would say is in line for backup full back. Like I think any manager has got to be pragmatic. Like I'd be surprised if Prunty played, because like you can't afford to put a guy out as carrying a niggle and he'd break down and you could miss the whole summer. I just think I don't think Liam Cahill will take the risk of anybody that's anyway dicey, because like the worst thing you want to do is aggravate it and make it feel an awful lot worse, because there is the safety net at the back door. I suppose the qualifiers, and like while it might be I think it's only an extra game in total, like so, but so you don't want to throw all your eggs into one basket. I just think the depth of the Waterford panel is too great at the moment. Like it talks that Shane O'Donnell is going to be missed out. I think he'll be a huge loss for Clare, but I just don't think Clare have the depth of panel maybe to overcome those injuries. Like you have the likes of David McInerney with a groin strain of 2 weeks. I think that's a difficult one, because like if you play him, it could break down again. So like I just think Waterford have enough guys to maybe shoulder maybe a few injuries at the moment. As you say, look, I think it'll be a high scoring game. I think it was 327 to 318 last year. I think it'll be something high again, because I think both teams will run at each other. They'll create overlaps. They'll get scores. I think, look, Tony Kelly's going to score high. I think the Bennetts are going to score high. I think Desi Hutchin's going to score. Like I think it'll be which defense will do as good a job and the other will win out in this game. I think the scoreboard operating Turles is going to be busier, but I think Waterford will probably shade it overall.
Would you go along with that, Brian?
Yeah, look, I think in general they probably just have an extra couple of options, and certainly Patrick Curran played very well off the bench when he came on against Limerick. I think Waterford's strength and depth might be that little bit more developed at this stage than Clare. Albeit Clare still have a couple of All-Ireland medal winners in their ranks, but they're getting few and far between at this stage, and 2013 is getting further away. And I suppose, look, it is, I suppose, even 12 months ago when Waterford were that little bit better. I don't think much has changed between the relative strengths of the sides since that day. I think most people would favour that Waterford should get over, and they're just, as I said, there's no excuses. They've been playing very well going into it. They seem to have added a few extra options as well. Full backline obviously is an issue. Shane Fives maybe again, he's a guy that went off injured himself the last day, so he'd be your next man in really for full back. But and I would be fearful. I'm a fan of Aaron Shannon. I think there's a lot to be said for having an outlet. The way teams particularly play, that it's not always easy to play the perfect ball. To have that outlet where you can throw it in high, low, and someone like Aaron Shannon will compete for it. And he is a serious threat close to goal. But yeah, no, look, I think it's on the evidence, as I said. I think you'd have to slightly favour Waterford to just have a little bit too much, and maybe a little bit more off the bench than what Brian Lohan has currently.
Yeah, certainly. Just something to bring in. I just think it's. I love the battle on the sideline. I think Cahill and Lohan are two old school guys. And just something that came into my mind is something that Len Gaynor said when, I suppose I'm going to plug the book I had from Len last year, but it was just something Len brought back to me of when, like, we know how tough that Clare full backline backer were in the 90s, and I said it was Len's one regret when it came to 97 that he didn't throw Liam Cahill, who was of course Len's son-in-law, in earlier because of a league game that happened in Ennis earlier that year where Liam Cahill really stuck it up to Brian Lohan and Frank Lohan, and I suppose like they were two of the toughest defenders you could get, and he said he always regrets that there was very few forwards maybe in that Tip team were willing to go toe to toe with those two, and he did in that league match, and it was just something that Len said he regretted maybe he didn't trust his gut to say if there was one guy that was going to stick it up in the All-Ireland final when the Clare backs got on top, it was Liam Cahill. So I think there's going to be the ultimate respect between those two on the sideline this Sunday. Like there's going to do. We all know with Liam Cahill, there's no excuses. I think Brian Lohan's the same. He'll take the excuses out of Clare. If they're beaten on the day, it's because Clare weren't good enough. There'll be no soft touches in terms of maybe putting guys out there that are not ready. What Liam and Brian will what they do on Sunday, they'll have the best 15 guys they feel will win the game for either Clare or Limerick or Waterford on Sunday.
I'm going to throw something at you here, Brian. Like with the way we watched Watford evolve their game in the last couple of seasons, and even going back as far as Derek McGrath, of course, as well, and Pádraig Fanning in the meantime, is that they like to run off the shoulder, use the ball. You know, they've athletes all over the field. Calum Lyons, you mentioned Kieran Bennett, Desi Hutchinson, Dara Lyons. You know, you can name an awful lot of players that can run right up through the centre, and that's before you even mention Austin Gleeson and the injured Taig de Burka. Tipperary, you look at the team, and myself and Shane talked about it last week. There are players with a certain amount of pace. There's some of them that probably have less pace or less pace than they used to have. So Liam Cahill has very much kind of brought that on again. And you see other teams using it. Cork have pace. Limerick are always running off the shoulder of each other as well. Do you think this is something that's going to catch up with Tipperary as this season goes on? Or were we sold a pup during the league? They're just going out and hurl away, but there's another plan in the back pocket coming?
Yeah, God, I don't know. I mean, I think it's down to the personnel you have. You know, you talk about all different sports and systems, but I think it really depends on what you have. And Liam Sheedy is probably looking at, you know, and I don't know, is that indoor track in Nina still going? Is there any speedsters in blue and gold up there at all? But you know, most of the Tipperary players, they're touch hurlers, they're brilliant skill, but they're, you know, you couldn't compare them, I suppose, with some of the players in other counties in relation to that out and out pace. Desi Hutchinson probably is a little bit different in that he has a soccer background, so you know he's able to turn in a sixpence. His movement is just a little bit different than what we're normally looking at in hurling. But whatever system you play, it comes down to you still need players to win their own ball, because if you haven't possession, you can't impose your will or any sort of a game plan if you can't win possession. And one of the issues in relation to Tipperary in Welsh Park the last day was the ball wasn't sticking in the forward line. Shane McCallum was back, looked very rusty. You know, there was the lack of ball winners in the half forward line where we would have seen the likes of Honor Maher in the past. You know, Niall Maher obviously is a loss there. You still need players to win ball. And most managers would look at what players to have at their disposal and try work a system around that. Waterford have a lot of, I suppose, younger players in general. They're all, I suppose, at the right age. As I said, that I won't use the word golden generation, but the team that won 2 All-Irelands, they're now at maturity, but they're still 25, 26 years of age. They can play that game that suits them. But Waterford has evolved. I suppose one of the criticisms of Derek McGrath's teams was that you know Shane Bennett would have been inside the full forward line on his own, and then it becomes very difficult. You now have a kind of a developed structure. You would have seen it perhaps with Ballygunner as well, where they have 2 on the inside line. You Waterford always have 2. They may rotate it, but you always have 2 in the inside line. Jack Prendergast, as I said, one of the yellow helmets will probably be named number 15, but he's out the field, you know, and works back the way. So they have quite I suppose, a developed plan in how they operate, how they perform. And you do have, you know, when you have that extra player, I suppose, out in that middle third, well, then it gives the Calum Lyons the opportunity to run forward. It gives maybe an Erla Daly to come forward and shoot a score. Austin Gleeson, if he's back that far. And you have that, if you have that extra second in, they can deliver the ball in front of Desi Hutchinson, in front of Shane Bennett. And it's working well for them. But it still goes back to, you know, what suits the players you have best. You know, Tipperary have, you know, Jason Ford, for all his talents, you know, he's not a Desi Hutchinson. You know, he's a different type of player. Noel McGrath, brilliant to look at, but he's not going to be soloing 50 yards, you know, with the ball and sticking the net. He's a different type of player. So, you know, I think Tip management are probably looking at what they have. The big question is, and you mentioned Gerard Brown previously, you know, is there younger players that can augment, you know, some of what they have? Is there, you know, Alan Flynn is very much a link player in the middle of the field. Is there, you know, more dynamic players that could be introduced that could give them an element of, I suppose, that running threat that other counties have? You know, I haven't seen it. You know what I mean? I'm not sure whether the players just are not there or whether they're not getting the opportunity. But it's very much the tried and tested, it seems, that the Tipperary are going to go with, and they're going to win and lose based on the tried and tested. But it's nice to look at the program and see guys who have won All Irelands and Munster Championships, and that's reassuring as well. But it's always the question of when is it, father time? When is the is the cliff edge in sight? I don't know. We'll probably know a lot more in this year's championship, but there, Pádraig Maher, Shamey, what is it, 2008, 2009? The amount of hurling they've done for Tipperary, the amount of big performances, what they've won in the game. But there does come a time for every player when when you're at that age where you look around and think, is now my time, or is my time past? So they're the type of, there's certainly, that question is certainly there. And I suppose, look, it'll only be answered in this year's championship. Is there another All Ireland in this Tipperary team, in this Tipperary panel? Is it, have they transitioned enough? These are all the big questions that, but in fairness, if you were to trust anybody to get the right answers, I think Liam Sheedy, Eamon O'Shea, Darragh Egan, these are the guys. Tommy Dunn, I don't think you could have better men at with at the helm. So I think we'd all trust that they're the men with the right answers.
Yeah, and we'll talk plenty more about Tipperary next week. We'll look at Leinster now quickly. Antrim are against Dublin this weekend in Navan, and then also you're going to see Wexford face up against Laois. Just to even reflect quickly on their league meetings, Wexford hammered Laois, and I think Laois, with all the injury issues they've had this year, Cheddar Plunkett is back in. He did get the likes of PJ Scully and Chad Wyer back in, but he's had a lot of injury issues. On the other game, a lot of people are tipping Antrim to have a bit, to upset Dublin here. I'm not so sure about that. Dublin beat them 126-118 in the league. Now, Antrim, they imploded on the freeze during the middle of that game, and that allowed Dublin to score something like 12 out of 13 points during the middle of the game after a good Antrim start. Darren Gleeson in charge there. What are you fancying from these two games? I presume we're all going to expect Wexford to get over Laois without too much trouble.
I would think so. Like, it's just a pity. It's just a pity that Laois haven't been able to kick on. Like, I think ideally they'd love to have had Eddie Brennan. I know he's your new club manager up in Coola there. Shane, look, I think ideally Eddie'd love to have had another year just by the continuity there. Look, and in terms of replacement, look, you couldn't get more passionate replacement than a Laois man than Cheddar Plunkett, and it just has been difficult. Like, they need everybody. They can't afford to be down 10 or 11 players in the National League to be competitive. Like, and look, in fairness, I think it could be a turgid enough game between themselves and Wexford. Like, both of them played the very same way. I remember watching the first match of the league in Wexford Park, and they both, for a lot of that game, they tended to cancel each other out. So I think Laois will be a lot more competitive this time. But I think Wexford will ultimately win. I think the other game, I still think Dublin will shade it, but like, it's set up there for Antrim to cause another upset. Like, if the game is in Navan, it's not your typical hurling championship venue. You'll have two grassy banks at the back of the goal, something like Corrigan Park up in Belfast. So you like to think it's like the pressure's all in Dublin. Like, I think they, along with Laois and maybe Wexford, I think were the disappointments in the league for me. There's an element of panic. You're going from Liam Rush from centre forward back to centre back, then back up to full forward again. They haven't really settled on anything, and I just think in terms of the touch hurlers, I think Antrim have more of them. And look, if Antrim get on a bit of a roll on Saturday, they could do it. So I still think Dublin, in terms of experience, might get there, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Darren Gleeson and the Saffrons have one more big game up their sleeves this weekend.
Yeah, Brian, there's no doubt that Antrim have really come on a lot under Darren Gleeson. If looking at that forward line, like Niall McKenna was brilliant last year when they won the Joe McDonagh Cup. He scored 4 points against Dublin when they met in the league this year. James McNaughton has been absolutely brilliant. Keelan Malloy has a lot of pace. Even like the fullback Jared Walsh, centre-back Paddy Burke. And that's before you even start talking about some of the other forwards they have, which includes Neil McManus. So they're obviously quite a proposition, and they're improving and on an upward trajectory. But still go through the Dublin team, and some people would have Owen O'Donnell down as the best fullback in the country. Others might say Dahi Burke, and there's a couple of other candidates. Sean Moore is obviously a good player. Liam Rush, Chris Crummy, Danny Sutcliffe has had some excellent games during this league. Donald Burke is a good player. Ronan Hayes is developing, and there's a goal in him as well. So how do you see that one going?
Well, Shane, I think you've listed out a load of individuals, but I'm not so sure I've seen a team or a team performance for Dublin. Like most of the counties in the league can look at something positive, you know, that there was one good game where things went for them or one good half. I think Dublin was one of the biggest disappointments in the league. I don't think they've shown, you know, any progress or any, I suppose, advancement at all. And the chopping and changing, you know, Chris Crummy, I think, is a, you know, brilliant halfback, and I watched him with I think it was a DCU playing as well, and you know, a lot of those players actually, but they just don't seem to be able to put it together under Matty Kenny for whatever reason. And obviously he had huge success with yourselves in Coola, but they just look like you listed a group of individuals as opposed to a team. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least that if Antrim could turn them over, you know, if you take the Antrim, I suppose, panel at the moment, they must be hugely positive. You know, they've had a couple of great results. They've really come on from, you know, Leicester's final up in Croke Park, and you know, when they beat Kerry, like, it was I thought the level was actually pretty average enough. I was at that game, but they've obviously got the best hurlers in Antrim in hurling on the county team, which wouldn't have always been the case in recent years. I'm unfortunate enough to have lost an All-Ireland club semi-final to Dunley back in the day. You know, so like there's very strong areas of hurling in Antrim. Darren Gleeson has obviously blended in perfectly up there, and you know, again, he's hugely intelligent guy, very passionate, big hurling man, and that's obviously rubbing off on the players, and they've really bought into what he's, I suppose, trying to achieve. I would look at it that you know, if I had to put my money on it, it would be on the panel and the team that have the better cohesion and look to be a little bit more together, and that's Antrim. I said I really couldn't tell you what Dublin, the way they're trying to play, what they're trying to do. And like you said, individually, yeah, they're all good players listed, but collectively, it's a long time since we've seen a performance from Dublin of any sort of stature, or that you could say, God, they're making real progress. So
you're going back to that 2019 game in Parnell Park when they turned over Galway. Like that's 2 years. It's a long time since we got one.
So now that a one-off. You know, they lost to Laois in was it the following week? You know,
they did, yeah.
I trust Dublin, to be honest.
Yeah, well, look, we might be back here next week, and I'm going to be saying Dublin are going to win this one.
A bit of a graw for him, maybe, but
yeah, I do. It's something that Brian mentioned. I met Darren Gleeson there a couple of months ago when we presented with a sports award for winning the McDonagh Cup, and he said, I asked him, like, have you got everybody that you want in that Antrim squad? And he says he has. Like, there's no, like, we all know how passionate the club rivalry is in Antrim, and maybe a couple of guys would say, oh, maybe they wouldn't maybe the Dunleys and the Cushendalls and the Ballycastle guys would mix together. He said he has everybody. He has everybody he needs, and we can see that. Like, we always hear certain counties, like, and I think Offaly have been the case in point the last few years. Offaly haven't had the best players committing to Offaly, and that's why they found themselves down in McDonagh and found Michael Fennelly has sort of rooted that out now. He has the best, and it's just unfortunate for Offaly. If Offaly were in the McDonagh Cup this year, they'd probably win it. Like, they're probably the best team below the Liam McCarthy Cup at the moment. Like, Darren Gleeson has everybody he wants in Antrim. He's bringing that sort of a pour-through vibe, and you know as I do, Brian, from when you were living at home, like, there's something special about pour-through. Like, they're a small club, narrow pick, but there's a great old spirit there, and he sort of brought that togetherness and that sort of family environment, club environment up to Antrim, and they seem to have bought into it. And like I say, it's worked for them. He's blended it together. I think if this game is anyway tight with 10 minutes to go, I know who my money will be to win a tight game, and that one, I think that'll be the team with the better team cohesion at the moment. I think that's Antrim. So I don't know if Shane, in terms of, like, you know, the Dublin scene better, whether there's, I just don't see that for even the time when Dalo was there. He always said the Dublin thing was coming and there was a great togetherness there. I'm not seeing that cohesion with Dublin that had been there under Dalo, and even
Maybe they have too many spots.
I just think it has fallen away a small bit, that togetherness to bring Dublin to the next level. Have they hit that? Is there another level with Dublin, or is this where they're at?
Well, we'll put it like this. If you took Seamus Callanan, Noel McGrath, Ronan Maher, and a few more out of the Tipperary team, what sort of cohesion would you get? Because with Dublin, the very best players in the county, arguably, would be Con O'Callaghan, Kieran Kilkenny, maybe Eric Lowndes. There's one or two other guys that are on the football side of things. Even Tomas Brady a couple of years ago, well, it's obviously several years ago at this stage, he moved over. Sean Tracy's not involved. Colin Cronin's living in Australia, hasn't been there for a few years. Darragh O'Connell's not involved. So a lot of the players that would be kicking it on to the next level are no longer there. And some of the other players that were important for a number of years have retired. And then the likes of Shane Barrett, he's taken himself off the panel as well. So there are a number of factors, and every team obviously is carrying a few injuries, and especially now coming into this new season again with the breakneck speed, everyone's picked up a couple of injuries. But the big problem is there aren't those quality forwards in Dublin. So you don't have Kieran Kilkenny and Con O'Callaghan who would instantly change the team overnight. I mean, if you're like, you both have seen what Con can do, and I don't want to build up a clubmate too much.
But they're not classes, they're not.
But they never had them, yeah.
Well, they may not have had them, but like you keep talking about getting onto this next level. How do you expect to get onto the next level if your best players never actually are there? The best players in the county aren't actually playing for the team. So I don't think it's a lack of togetherness. I think of any group of players out there, Dublin generally die with their boots on. And I've watched them play in a lot of big games and, lose Darrow once to Kilkenny and what have you. And they have absolutely left everything out on the field. So, and I'm not saying you're questioning the heart on the field or anything like that, but I do think that there is a good togetherness with these players. It does look like the quality isn't there. He is having to sort of move the likes of Crummy up to the forward line because maybe the ball's been won up there. I wouldn't play Crummy in the forward line. I think that I don't know if you've done it, but like if you've ever been a back and tried to convert yourself into a forward, it's very difficult because you just don't really, it's tough. It feels unnatural, and you probably face the ball too often and don't make your man turn the other way and all these different sort of things. So I think it's just they're trying to juggle everything around and get a nice little balance. But if Keane Boland hits form, if Ronan Hayes hits form, if Mark Schutte can stay fit and hit form, Danny Sutcliffe, they can kick on. But there are weaknesses over the field. I still think they'll beat Antrim, but, I don't think that they're necessarily a team that isn't together and doesn't have a certain amount of quality. But yeah, there are certainly frailties there. So we could go on about that one for a good bit longer. Just a final one. Shane, you're not overly enamoured of seeing Tipperary against Cork in the Munster Camogie semi-final on a Sunday evening. That's something we saw last weekend in the league final as Kilkenny saw off Galway, and Tipperary obviously going so close against Kilkenny in the semi-final. We can feel now that Tip maybe aren't too far away from making a breakthrough there. But your thoughts on that semi-final going ahead on a Sunday evening?
Yeah, look, I maybe in the current climate, it's probably not a risk to take, but I wouldn't like to see Sunday evening games becoming the norm when spectators are allowed back in unlimited. But it's like the last thing if you're a Tipperary supporter of a Sunday evening to drive all the way down to Park you're in and you're not getting back to 11, it'll turn you off straight away. So the drive, and you're getting back at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So look, I suppose the fact that there's not going to be huge Tip support going down to that game, it'll probably be shown live online somewhere. So look, that'd be my worry. Maybe it's just a short-term thing just to get it through this year. But look, I suppose this other disappointment thing is that I think a lot of people didn't really know these games were going ahead this weekend. Like people are looking at down to the All-Ireland Championship start, Broome Robin stage starting in maybe 2 weeks' time. And look, I still think within the panel, the Tipperary panel and probably the Cork panel, they'll see this is a great game to get ahead of the championship. And like for Tipperary, like they'll look at Kilkenny winning that league last thing, and that should have been us. Like Tipperary, and I'm glad the fact that Anna Geary and Ursula Jacob referenced it on the coverage last Sunday evening that for 55 minutes of that league semi-final, Tipperary weren't better than Kilkenny. They were so far better than Kilkenny, but I remarked it on Twitter afterwards. Like Kilkenny probably should have lost 4 or 5 league games, but it just shows something about the mentality of Kilkenny, whether it's their men's teams or their women's teams. It's just so hard to beat you. They need to be togged in and the bus back home before they're beaten. And it just shows you how close Tipperary are. I'm sure the Bill Manani and the girls would love to get one over Cork this weekend and to get into the championship, knowing that they've beaten one of the big three. It might only be a Munster championship game, which has probably been diluted the last few years. But look, they'd love to go into the championship with a win over Cork under the belt, knowing they're as good. They've beaten Cork. They know they're as good as Kilkenny. They just didn't put them away. Then knowing they're as good as Galway. So look, I think it's a big game for Tipperary this week. And if they lose, look, it won't be detrimental. But like I think, in terms of build up to the championship, it'll be well set up for them.
And Brian, just a final word there, and you might have some insight into Watford. They're playing Limerick in the other side of the Munster draw.
Yeah, look, I think Waterford, I suppose, have been disappointing in the league, and they would have been very disappointed to get relegated. The new manager this year in Derek Lyons, who's hugely experienced. He would have been manager of the Waterford under-20 hurlers and Waterford minor hurlers in the past. His son, actually, Darragh Lyons, is on the Waterford senior hurling panel. I watched them train actually in Mount Sinai a few weeks ago, and they look to be moving well. So it's a bit of a disappointment. I think they'll probably go into this one as underdogs as well. But they do need to find a bit of form before they hit the All-Ireland Championship in the group stages. They've found their feet, I suppose, having come back up to senior level, having won the intermediate a few years ago. They've, a bit like Tipperary, they've been finding their feet. They've been qualifying for All-Ireland quarterfinals. A little bit of a worry and a bit of a setback. The league hasn't gone that well for them. I do wonder, are they, sometimes I'm looking at some of the streaming of the games there. Beth Carton seems to be playing maybe too far from the opposition goal. I think you need her inside in the full forward line. They've got Abby Flynn committed this year to Camogie. She's another fabulous player. Niamh Rockett has had, I suppose, a few injury problems as well and trying to play through injuries. So they've had their issues. And I know Pat Ryan, I suppose, who's managing Limerick, they'll fancy this one. They've probably had the better form going into it. And look, I suppose everybody wants a boost and wants that confidence boost going into the All-Ireland series. And I'd be a little bit worried for Watford that they've seemed to, I don't know, take maybe a little bit of a backward step, whether they can turn it around. They certainly have the players. Lorraine Bray, as I said, Niamh Rockett, Beth Carton is as good a player as in the country. And I think Abby Flynn is another young player that you're going to hear a lot about as well. But they just need a bit of a confidence boost. But Limerick look to maybe have their number at this stage, particularly having won in the league.
Yeah, I suppose, Brian, it would be a big disappointment for them to be relegated. But like you would have looked at maybe the last 2 or 3 years, like there was probably a puck of a ball between Tip and Waterford. But then if you go back to the league matches there this year, like Tip were 216 to 11-point winners. It seemed to have a bit of a divide has grown. And look, Tip, I think noticeably from Tip's performance, have kicked on. But like I would have thought, like it seemed Waterford have slipped back slightly, and I suppose losing to Dublin, like it was only a point of a defeat, but I don't know. It was probably for their point of view. Do you think have they slipped back a bit?
It's hard to know. I think they've in certainly in the league games they've started very slowly, and and they've nearly been out of the game by the time half time comes around, and I think there's definitely issues in defence. You've the likes of Trish Jackman has stepped away from the team now as well, and she would have been a stalwart at centre back. And it's still you haven't quite got, as I said, Abby Flynn has come into the forwards. She's a very good young player. Not the same quality maybe coming through in the defence for one reason or another. And I think that's where their big issues is in defence. Conceding too many scores, conceding too many frees, and the fact that they've had to move Beth Carton out the field too frequently, that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign. Now, I said, look, Derek Lyons is a very experienced manager. If anybody can turn it around, I think he certainly has that sort of knowledge, and he would be, I suppose, on the local scene here, he'd certainly know what players are coming through. I suppose not having like Galtier would have been knocking on the door maybe and Munster Club, and that not having that played in the last year or two might have affected, I suppose, the competitive edge as well. They depend probably a lot on a couple of clubs, the likes of Galtier, the likes of De La Salle, Lismore as well. So it's not as developed. I suppose traditionally, ladies football in Waterford traditionally would be stronger actually than the camogie. That's kind of been reversed in recent years, and there's a lot of work going in underage in Waterford, in camogie in particular. But it's taken a little bit of time to develop. Probably need to develop, I suppose, more in the city here as well in Waterford, and to get more players from the city. It's and I think underage, there's been one or two good teams, but again, underage, certain under 16 minor in recent years, they've been inclined to maybe being in the secondary competition as opposed to the Division 1 as well. So look, they have a bit to do, and I'm sure they are, I suppose, concerned having not really had a game in the league that they could hang their hat on and say, well, look, that's, if we can replicate that, and even losing out a close game, I know there was only a point in it, but you'd rather be at the right side of it than losing by a point. So I think they're certainly on notice that they need to find something from somewhere, and particularly in defence. So it's they're certainly still struggling to find that form that they can take into, I suppose, the All-Ireland series. And look, that's really what every team is gearing up for at the end of the day. Munster Championship hasn't the same luster maybe as it would have previously had, or certainly not as the men's game. So look, it's another opportunity to I suppose, to find form for them, and I'm sure they're looking forward to, they really, a team like that, you need to get a win. Do you know what I mean? You need to find something somewhere, whether it's a behind closed door challenge game on route to championship, or in as I said, a game like this, which is another opportunity. You need to find a bit of confidence from somewhere, and they desperately could do with, a good performance, yes, but a win as well.
Absolutely. So that's it for another action-packed show here on Tippcast, brought to you by the Nina Guardian. My thanks to Shane Brophy as ever, and Brian Flannery for joining us this week. We'll be back again next week. Thanks very much, lads.
See you, Shane.
Cheers.
Welcome to Tippcast by the Nina Guardian.
Great stuff, lads.